Now entering the Bitcoin Podcast Network.
Today's episode is brought to you by KeepKey, the easy, safe, and simple way to protect your Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, and many other digital assets. There's no time like the present to protect yourself from hackers, malware, and viruses. Visit keepkey.com to order your secure hardware wallet today and use the code HUMANIST10 for a limited time 10% discount. And I also have a Patreon, and on that people pay me money, for food or cheese or saltines or whatever. But you know what? I don't want your filthy nation state fiat. I would, however, take your 5-star reviews though. So if you like the show, please rate it on iTunes or Google Play or whatever. I really would appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Hello everybody. So in today's episode, we chat with Soona Amhaz, the CEO of Token Daily, and two big things kind of come out. One is it's fascinating to hear her talk about how she curates good stories in this world of distributed trust. And then two, the Token Daily and her exist in between these various crypto communities like Bitcoin and Ethereum, etc., which are generally very polarized. So it's interesting to hear her talk about how to have her balanced perspective and balanced mindset while still having strong opinions. So with that, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everybody. My name is Reese Lindmark, and you're listening to another episode of Creating a Humanist Blockchain Future. In this podcast, we take a systems thinking approach to doing good in the world, and we have a couple of different series that focus on this different system scopes. And today, we're focusing on Series A, macro systems, where we ask the question, where are we, as humanity, headed? And to chat about that, I'm very happy to introduce Soona Amhaz to the show. Soona is a co-founder and CEO of Token Daily, a site that surfaces the signal from the noise in crypto. Soona, thanks for being on the show, and welcome.
Thanks for having me. I feel very welcomed.
Sweet, good. And the fun thing with this is actually when I started this podcast last year sometime, I was thinking a lot about the attention economy and how to do signal to noise more generally. And so I think that this kind of aligns a lot with that. So at a high level, though, could you give us like a high level overview of like what actually is Token Daily?
Yeah, so Token Daily, we launched it end of January. And from day one, our mission's always been to be the front page of the CryptoNet. And there are different verticals that go into that. One of them includes servicing high quality news, specifically the ones that the community is discussing, featuring launches of new blockchain and crypto projects, updates from these bigger, more robust projects that ship, and as well as provide token analysis, as well as thought leadership pieces from influencers, or rather thought leaders.
Yeah, the people who are essentially you guys. I mean, it is cool when you just go to tokendaily.co. You have both like Ask Me Anythings that are happening. You have you kind of do some syndicate pieces where people will write for you, and it'll be on Token Daily. And you also have some kind of interesting like aggregator thing that kind of takes it looks at like Reddit and maybe Twitter and some other upvotes. How does that thing work? That it like combines a bunch of things to give to like up prioritize certain content.
Right. So the main feed is a little antithetical to the space in that we select certain users and certain contributors that have produced high quality content consistently, that work on projects that have been vetted and diligenced by others in the community. And we see the links in the posts that they're sharing. We crawl Twitter, Reddit, and Hacker News to see if those links have been shared elsewhere, and then aggregate the comments around them in several platforms. So that way, what's surfaced to you are the important links that are being discussed within the community, and all the comments that people have around the post.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. I'm surprised that you guys use Hacker News actually, because I feel like there's a little bit crypto in some ways. It's like, only in some ways, but it was kind of built outside of Silicon Valley to some extent. Like Hacker News was the site of Y Combinator and that kind of epicenter of startup stuff. Is Hacker News? I personally don't use it that much for my crypto world, but is it still a relatively good crypto source?
Right. So that's true. All of the above to what you just said, but which is why you don't see Hacker News comments come up frequently in the feed. But on occasion, these high quality pieces on crypto that affect the tech community at large, things about, decentralized social apps like Mastodon, right? And what does this mean for the future of Twitter? Articles like that seem to affect the tech community at large will occasionally make their way onto Hacker News, and you'll see the comments around there. And it's great to get perspectives from people who are not in the crypto space, but are working on these centralized servers and working within the tech community, because one, you're eventually going to be, the hope is that you're converting a lot of these builders and developers to the blockchain space and have them develop this more robust community. And then two, just to get their insight, right? We tend to adopt this myopic view based on what we already know. And so to have these fresh eyes and people using raw reasoning and asking, does this make sense? Is this something people would use? And introducing different areas of discipline like design or UX focus as well are critical. And so I actually welcome and encourage input from various sources. And Hacker News, although it doesn't come up frequently, when it does have some gems.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it is really nice when you go and read Hacker News stuff about crypto, because they're very like healthily skeptical about it all. So you're like, thank God, this is nice to read.
Yeah, healthily skeptical, healthily being the critical word here.
Hopefully word there. Yeah, exactly. So do you think so? Token Daily as it is right now, the front page of crypto, tell me more about like your long-term like mission or goals. Like what does this look like in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years?
Right. So our long-term goals, there are a few. Ultimately, we want to make it a friendlier space and the ability to really have the world buy in to blockchain and crypto and have it legitimized. And the only way that's going to happen is if the space is more comprehensive and accessible to the mainstream. Right now, they conflate it or tether it to bad actors or like drug dealers, people doing the unsavory or having unsavory interests. But in order to make it more understandable, make it more digestible, and win some of these users over, we're going to need to disinfect the space a little bit and shed some light on what the good what the good use cases are, what the provoking high quality thought pieces look like, as opposed to leaving it to the user to scrounge the dark alleyways of Reddit or subgroups of Twitter, which don't really paint a full picture and are pretty fragmented. That said, making it friendlier so we can onboard mainstream to crypto, making it more accessible. Also improving the dialogue between people within the space. It seems like we talk past each other a lot. There isn't much. I don't see the thought exercise of, well, if my opponent or if my quote unquote like adversary is true or is right, like what does that look like? What is a world where dApps become the killer app,
Tron.
Right?
Okay.
Or what is a world in which the white paper is a copy and pasted from the Filecoin actually works? Yeah. Which I mean is a good thought exercise to have. So it's why and we'll get to this I imagine later on in the podcast, but we don't tend to skew one way towards the Bitcoiners or the Ethereum maximalists, which is this term that I am seeing surfacing often, or, even people that are purely focused on NFTs or whatnot. We keep a fairly balanced view to encourage discussions on both sides and surface to the other side what they might be missing, right? And bridging those gaps. So making it friendlier, more accessible, and really encouraging productive dialogue are our main goals.
Yep, that makes sense. So let's stay on that dialogue one for a second. How do you imagine I mean, it can just be, I feel like it's really tough. So to encourage dialogue sometimes, with an example here being at the MIT Media Lab, they have the Digital Currency Initiative, and one of their folks, Corey Fields, just found this bug within Bitcoin Cash, and he was very very professional about it, and he let them know about their bug, even though he works generally for Bitcoin. And then when they posted it live, then after they posted on Twitter, someone said, yeah, this is okay, but really, why is Corey working on BTC? He should instead be working on Bitcoin Cash. And it was like, and for me, and you see those things all the time on crypto Twitter. So how do you imagine trying to encourage dialogue?
So I want to start answering that by saying what Corey did was incredibly courageous. That piece specifically illuminates the decision he made where, if he contributed or committed this or made known that there's this bug, and it seems dramatic, but was actually it could have been risking his life if somebody beat him to exploiting the bug and, profiting millions off of it. Because it presumably could either have been him or he would have facilitated that. So, in walking through his thought process, he said something that was incredibly poignant, and he said something to the effect of, if it were me working on Bitcoin Cash, I would hope that somebody who had found this, in Bitcoin Core would come forth and, let me know. And that is, and what's the broader thing he's saying here is this exercise of empathy, right? He put himself in the position of the opposition, or what is presumably the opposition. And that's where I see a lot of this bridging the dialogue happening, is forcing people to, really question their priors, and as opposed to just looking to confirm them, and really asking themselves, if I was in, this Ethereum developer's position, why would I be building this project? Where am I seeing this value being derived from? And from the opposite side, right? If you are an Ethereum maximalist, asking yourself, does sound money starting as a store of value, is wealth preservation, is this, the end all be all? Why would a Bitcoin maximalist be so passionate about this one use case, right? Or why is it that this community is passionate about this about Bitcoin, and really just seeing what projects are going on in each space, and hopefully what that does is pique curiosity, as opposed to ignite debate, or not so much debate. I do like debate, not so much ignite more of these tribalistic behaviors or attacks.
Yep. I like that. I think that I super agree with the word curiosity there. And I think that is in some ways what Token Daily can do long term, is surface high enough quality content so that even if you're a XYZ maximalist and you see a piece about ABC being an actual good thing, then you can be like, oh my God, this is actually really cool. So let's stay on that for a second. So, I mean, when you all at Token Daily, in January, when you said, hey, we're doing Token Daily, I was pretty skeptical. I was like, oh man, another newsletter kind of thing, and the front page of crypto, but isn't Twitter the front page of crypto? And so I was skeptical, but then over time, I feel like you guys have done a really good job of actually doing signal to noise within the space. So tell me, how does, and you talked about this a bit in terms of trying to create these balanced viewpoints, but how do you actually kind of surface and look through the sea of information that there is, and kind of surface the best stuff to the top?
Right. And that seems to be the billion-dollar question, at least as it pertains to crypto blockchain media. We're in this interesting time where a lot of the people producing great media are not interested in being in the business of media. So these people are writing interesting pieces and doing excellent research. And publishing that, not for the intent of being journalists, right, but for the intent of making their research on their own protocols public, or, to signal high quality or critical thinking in order to raise further funds or something of that nature.
Yep.
And so what ends up happening, though, is regardless of their intent or the means by which they're writing, you do start recognizing who the leaders in the space are, at least who the vocal ones are. And they do an excellent job curating their resources. So you start with them. And this is thinking back to how I started, right? And how a lot of other users that have they're now active on Telegram, they're sourcing Gitter, they're now a lot further on. But when you're starting, is to recognize who is curating high quality content consistently, and then going to those sources. A lot of times you'll find they come directly from projects, blogs. You'll find that a lot of reputable VC firms have invested in these projects, and you can find them there and then go find their blogs there. All following them on Gitter, going to their Discord channels, talking to developers in the community if you have access, or just emailing them, finding out what projects they're excited about and why. And making sure when you do read, a CoinDesk article or anything on Cointelegraph, that you're actually clicking the links and looking at the source, as well as looking at the comments around what people are saying. And that way you can start, differentiating what's noise and what's signal based on your own research. I encourage critical thinking. I think where it fundamentally breaks down is people will look at headlines and either form an opinion right there or click at the article and read the first few paragraphs and passively consume that and adopt that as their own opinion, as opposed to critically think about what the piece is actually saying, who wrote it, what incentives they have, and putting it out there. So I'd recommend first, finding the actual curators and leaders in the space, looking at the sources and articles that they publish and that they promote, and then also doing your own research, looking at the sources that those articles include, and then going from there.
Yep, I like that. So, and I think that it reminds me of two things. One is when you talk about finding the curators first, we're in this weird new world of distributed trust, where instead of having our traditional centralized, institutionalized trust, where you say, hey, I'm going to go to New York Times, or I'm going to go to maybe even something like CoinDesk to get my information. Instead, you say, hey, I'm going to look at across these 10 curators who have been shown to curate generally well in the past, what are they curating? And you kind of, it's this weird new version where the trust, instead of it existing within a centralized thing, is existing within kind of the network itself. And I feel like the other key part of that you hit on is making sure that you ask what the people's incentives are, because so often people are saying things and then you have to know, you can't just look at what they're writing, but you also have to know who are they and what is the institution that they exist within, because then that can tell you what are they incentivized to say.
Precisely.
So is there something for you? Is there a difference between the way that you curate and then also the way that Token Daily curates?
So in both instances, I'm a firm believer in dog fooding. And so in both instances, it's primarily using our platform, right? So for the Token Daily newsletter, we're consistently linking back to the news items that populate on our actual feed. And that's generally where I'm getting my news as well. We've already done the work of whitelisting, these leaders in this space, and these sources where this information comes from. So those have already been vetted as reliable. And then taking the screening one step further and making sure all the sources that they are referring to say what they're actually saying. I take it one step further, I suppose, in that I'm actually, digging through people's likes on Twitter, which we don't display on our Token Daily platform.
Wow, that's pretty aggressive.
It is, but you have to do the work, right? And I recognize the privilege in this, but I do have access to, the founders of projects. So when something comes up about the project, like, for instance, when the controversy around Zcash locking their forum thread, over, a proposal came about. I was directly talking to the team to figure out what was going on there. We were able to report on it in a way that was objective and presented the facts as were and not sensationalized, as I found a lot of Twitter users had made it out to be. It really seemed apocalyptic at the end. Like you thought people's lives were on the line. And directly going into these Discord and Gitter channels and seeing what people are discussing is the work I do. And that's generally how I curate signal from the noise.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like it's. I personally have never gone into people's Twitter likes. I'll say that. I think that's good, but I think that I have never made that final step. Cryptocurrency is vibrant and exciting, but it's not without its share of bad actors. Exchanges and personal accounts can get hacked. Computers can be infected with malware. Left unprotected, your digital wealth is up for grabs. Don't let yourself be a victim. KeepKey is the safest and simplest way to protect your Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, and other tokenized assets. This hardware wallet is a separate device that you control. Brought to you by the pioneering team at Shapeshift, KeepKey works with the wallet software on your computer to manage your private keys and transactions. Your device is PIN protected, which provides protection if it falls into the wrong hands. Its large display lets you carefully view and approve every transaction. And if your KeepKey is ever lost or stolen, you can safely recover your device without compromising its private keys. The bottom line, you'll sleep easier knowing that your digital wealth is safe and secure. Visit keepkey.com to order yours today and use the code HUMANIST10 for a limited time 10% discount. Is there do you think, so the other thing that's weird here is there's all these other newsletters, and there's like Token Economy, there's Proof of Work, there's This Week in Ethereum, there's these other newsletters. I think Pomp on Twitter, he has one that he charged like $50 a month for his newsletter. It's like, that's kind of aggressive. Is there, and there's starting to be these new newsletters, specific newsletters, the 0x Relayers, the NFT newsletter, the Proof of Stake newsletter, with all, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Token Daily right now is just a daily newsletter, not a weekly. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is there, so how do you see, is Token Daily are you all going to compete on the weekly newsletter cycle? Are you going to make, how would you see yourself kind of co-evolving with these other newsletters as they pop up?
That's an excellent question. And it is a running joke that there are more newsletters than there seem to be DApp users than DApps in general. I approach it more from an abundance mindset in that there can be, it truly isn't a competition. There are, the more curation that's going on in the space, one, speaks to the amount of activity that's happening in the space, which is a great signal. Second part to it is in more traditional industries, we have Finimize, we have Morning Brew, we have The Skim, we have Stratechery, and I don't hear discussions or questions around, which newsletter will win amongst those, because it's a kind of an absurd question, right? They each have nuance, or they each cover things that are a little different. And it's the same in the crypto space as well. We, for instance, are more community driven and avoid reporting on pricing. And those are two specific things that we made clear from the get-go. Whereas, Pomp's newsletter provides great market analysis at the top and really has more of these traders and institutional investors understanding the space, especially within the framework of these legacy institutions, which is great for on-ramping and adds a different financial perspective, as well as Proof of Work is more of a technical flavor. So if you're interested in what the projects are doing on a ground level, like you're hearing straight from the developers and straight from their comms team to understand what they've shipped that week. And then there's this pressure, right, at the end of every week, because they're not only announcing things based on whenever they have updates. It's, what have you done this week? So there's another layer to Proof of Work that's genius. And Token Economy, what I applaud Stamano for doing is that, they have opinionated recaps. And whereas, we keep it pretty, We like to keep it a little bit more balanced, so we'll allow the readers to moralize for themselves. But what I love about Token Economy is that they provide opinions. So it sparks a lot of great discussion, and they're on a weekly cadence, and that's different as well. So there's something great about all of these newsletters, and I think for a full picture, we end up finding people subscribe to many, if not all.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. It's funny because there's as you say, you can bucket them all in the same thing, but they are very differentiated from each other. I think you did a good job of differentiating them. Is there one, by the way, is there a newsletter that I didn't list that you also consume, by the way?
I love Tony Shang's newsletter.
Oh, nice. I didn't know he made one. Okay, that's great.
And it is purely, it is like a blog post. It's his blog post, but in an email form, and it goes straight to your inbox. But do you read his blog post?
I know Tony's stuff. So it is just his blog posts. He's not actively curating things. It's more his ideas. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So it's his blog posts in email form, and they go straight to your inbox. Yeah.
I like that. I'll check that, but no others that are at the curation level. Is that true?
There's Joyce runs. There's one that bridges the Asian world as well as the Western world. Translates Chinese and news into English, and that's Global Coin Research. That one's pretty under the radar. I know a few. I know Linda subscribes as well, and we find that incredibly useful.
Cool. Okay, sweet. I'll check that one out. So, and a thing that you were talking about there was we're going to transition to a section that we've never done before in this podcast, which is and it's completely and totally stolen from Tyler Cowen. It's the underrated, overrated section. So we're just going to do some kind of hot takes here, where I'm going to say something, and then you're going to tell me whether you think it's overrated or underrated, and then give a little bit of texture. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, sweet. So the first one is we'll talk about some memes. So do you think HODL as a meme, is that underrated or overrated?
Overrated, but I want to explain purely in just how often it's used. But I do believe it's important, right? So it can be overrated, but still important. Store value, incredibly important. I think holding is a utility, and a lot of people don't recognize that because I don't think they've been in a position where they understand how important it is. But, if you are in Turkey or in Venezuela, you understand holding is the utility.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's funny because the store of value, you're correct in saying that store of value maps onto HODL. I don't know if there's a meme that maps onto medium of exchange, There's nothing like spindle or whatever.
Tradle.
Yeah, exactly. So the second one, the maybe the second biggest one is Biddle as a meme. Do you think that's underrated or overrated?
Biddle is becoming overrated. I think it's still it's I don't know the bridges between underrated and overrated. It's just rated. But it's interesting that Biddle is actually being positioned as an attack on Bitcoin maximalists recently. In that you're applying the same framework, inverting the L. But then also attacking them for not actually what's perceived as innovating, right? In that you're actually building, whereas others are holding, which could be perceived as lazy or whatnot. So it's actually interesting. There's this debate coming about around Biddle versus HODL.
Yeah, I feel like Biddle is. And the weird thing is it started primarily within the Ethereum ecosystem, and then it was funny to see it kind of spread because now Ethereum Classic is using hashtag Biddle on Twitter a lot, or I see people from the Lightning Network using hashtag Biddle. So it's interesting to see because everybody can Biddle,
right?
It's that, but hopefully more people Biddle. Okay, do you think crypto Twitter as an entity, aka all the crypto people on Twitter chatting with each other and spending their time on there, is that underrated or overrated?
Can I just reject the premise and say stressful?
Oh, okay. Wow. What do you mean by stressful?
Overrated versus under. Oh, it's, crypto Twitter has slowly devolved into this a game of intellectual one-upsmanship. And it's pretty tough to see, users disparaging other projects and, trying to outwit one another. And sometimes it's stressful to keep up with, all the debates that are going on. So overrated or underrated, meh, but stressful, certainly.
Interesting. That's funny. So give me an example of this intellectual one-upsmanship that's happening on there.
Oh, I mean, just this morning, just purely recency bias, but this Preston talking about whether or not Infura is actually experiencing 8 to 10 billion requests. And if you actually break it down on a second-by-second level, it seems to imply that Infura is experiencing more requests than Google search. Right. And so there's this debate about, people ousting, Preston, people ousting the Ethereum founder. It's a disaster.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I guess there's calling out, and I guess I see calling out is different than intellectual one-upsmanship. Oh, in any case, the next underrated, overrated.
And that's to be clear, it's good to question. It's good to question and understand where these statistics are coming from. It's another thing altogether to actually call out people for disparaging their character, calling them morons, etc.
Yep, I agree. Okay, do you think books as a general category are underrated or overrated?
Books are underrated. The reading of books is underrated. People do like to create lists. People do like to signal that they are reading or will be reading certain books, but whether that reading gets done is I think that something tells me that that's not. There's some work to be done there, and I think it's underrated.
And so, and why are books underrated?
Books are underrated. There's this overarching philosophy that a lot of especially within the crypto community, that as soon as these books are published, the information is stale, right? That the technology moves more quickly than publishing companies do. And I think that's false, in that a lot of books and, for instance, the Bitcoin Standard, because I'm assuming a lot of these users have read it, or your listeners have read it, go over fundamentals. Like, what is money? What does the history of money look like? What do we consider to be sound? Everything from glass beads and whatnot. So these fundamentals don't change. People's psychology around using products do not change. And I think insofar that you're reading this and deeply understanding what are other forces at play here, I think that's severely underrated, especially books that are also not native to crypto. I highly recommend reading books on psychology, right? Reading books on governance structures and then applying those frameworks and seeing where they work and don't work within the blockchain and crypto sphere.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think, and I agree with you. Well, some people in not only in crypto but in life in general are down prioritizing books, because the other issue that people say with books is that it's like taking a blog post and expanding it into a full book, and you don't really need that or whatever. And you just have to find the correct books. But I think I agree with what you're saying, which is some variant on either like Jeff Bezos talking about, hey, instead of thinking about what will change in the future, think about what won't change in the future, and then kind of operate around those principles, aka write around those principles. It's similar to the Lindy effect, like a Taleb idea, where it's like, hey, if there's something that's been around for a while and this book is still loved by the people or whatever, then yeah, you should probably read it. Okay, and one final note on that actually is, when thinking about these books, is they might become out of date, but they're a different vibe than a blog post, in that they're like a curated synthesis of all the stuff that happened before them, and then to put it into a nice, small, concise form. So yeah, I think it's pro. I'm writing a book, so I'm glad you say underrated. The final one here is California / San Francisco / Silicon Valley. Is that underrated or overrated?
I might be biased. There might be a geographical bias here in that I am based in San Francisco. Truthfully, do think that Web 3.0, Silicon Valley's effect on crypto and blockchain is underrated right now. What we are doing is effectively predicting, Netflix in the 80s, or at least trying to predict, could you predict Netflix in the 80s? I would assume not, right? And I think that's what a lot of us are trying to do, right? It's like, what does this look like 30 years out. And I think that insofar as, especially with this bear market, it seems as though a lot of these promises and narratives around distributed computers and decentralized apps, and, thinking of blockchain and crypto as a tech as opposed to a money, has pretty much has been watered down, and it's lost a lot of its enthusiasm. So right now, I think it's a little underrated.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, and I think that Silicon Valley, it's like a weird thing where you have, with talking to people, it's like, yes, initially it may have started elsewhere, but there's so much inertia there that it's like, wow, there's so many good developers there, so many good people there that are working on this stuff. And as you say, there are people there that were part of the internet cycle that you can look back to and like look for them for help with whatever in this future kind of cycle. So, okay, well, thank you for playing that game. Let's transition back kind of out into Token Daily and specifically the kind of content that you guys have out there. And actually, let's start with Soona. You said that in general, you guys just curate content, but you said that you are writing a piece. What is that?
We generally curate. I like to really, it's all about the community as opposed to me pushing my own thoughts on the community. I'd like to especially surface rising stars that generally fly under the radar. But I am writing a piece, and this is tugging and pulling on that thread around, what if we question our views and question our assumptions? And so the title is, can Ethereum be a sound money? And then it walks through the mechanisms that need to be in place for ETH to become a sound money. And one of those, and this is giving a little peek, I don't want to go too in depth, but one part of it is, do you have a credible monetary policy? Specifically, is there a mechanism in place where you can predict inflation or inflation approaches zero, right? And so there's one argument where, the Ethereum ice age will lead to that. And that's one thing I discuss in addition to others. And what's even more interesting is I've asked my Bitcoin maximalist friends to review it. And it was not met with any, at first, they were intrigued. And a few of them have commented, like, this is actually very interesting. I'm glad we're having this thought exercise, because it does make you question your fundamentals.
Yeah, interesting. So is ETH a sound money? And what is the answer? Or should we have to wait? Do we have to wait?
The podcast. One other thing that's really interesting, especially in this, winner takes, money is a winner and winner takes all framework, is I find a lot of Bitcoin supporters lean on this crutch of, Lindy effect, right? But, if you're thinking on a 100-year, 1,000-year scale, how powerful is the Lindy effect? How powerful is like a few-year head start, really, right? Things like where you adjust your horizons and what horizons are you actually talking about. So I'm excited to write that and get it out into the world soon.
Okay, I will retweet, or I will like it when it happens, or I will check it out first. So beyond your own content, what kind of content? I mean, there's stuff that you all have already posted, but I'm actually interested in this question a little bit more. What are the things that you are looking for people to write on? What are things you're like, we want this kind of content or whatever?
So the type of content I generally look for, are macro level pieces, ones that really dissect trends, and anything that draws on patterns and trends in the space is something that I'm very fond of evaluating first, as well as problems in the space, specifically, around biases that we have, around tribalistic behaviors, around incentives. Specifically, I'd like to see a piece on incentive alignment. Why do we conflate incentives with monetary rewards? If you look to what incentivizes open source or FOSS developers, it's not necessarily, there are non-economic incentives. There's this duty to a community. There's this duty to creating something bigger than yourself. looking at those types of pieces those are the types of pieces that I happily encourage.
Got it. So macro stuff, and then problems, issues, incentives, stuff like that.
Yes.
That makes sense. And what are some of your recent favorite Token Daily articles?
This one's a tough question. It's like you
have to choose one of your
my favorite.
And just to note to the listeners, Soona loves all of the things that happen. Yeah,
it's a tough question. It's like being asked which kid's your favorite. So exactly. I'll take a more data-driven approach to answer this one, and nice. Some of our more popular blog posts. One of them was "Free Company" by Joel Carlson, and the piece goes through a system that matches up, this like pent up supply of talent in the dev world, but as well as in marketing and design, with rampant demand from actual protocol projects. And so she imagines this world where there's an entity or entities that bring together top talent and match them with top projects in the world, allowing contributors to freely access the ecosystem, contribute for wherever demand is needed within that project, and you're able to be contracted and work collaboratively across the space. I love Jill's piece because it's imagining a different future, right? It's taking these trends towards like digital nomadism, towards these decentralization of projects through the habits in which we work. The freelancer. Seems to be the age of the freelancer and contributors, and so if we keep tugging at this trend, like what does that look like at scale? Is there a future where there's such thing as a free company? And as she was writing this piece, I was thinking about, even one step further is like, is there a place where, these contributors are anonymized, right? And they have, it's based on their reputation, right? Let's find a way to tokenize this, right? Like, do they have like a token, or do they have a way to grade or evaluate their actual work and not tether it to their identity based on their name or who they seem to be. So there's a lot of interesting prophesizing that could happen with that piece, and that I think it resonated with the user base because it imagined a different future than the one we have now, and it takes a lot of creativity, original thinking, and as well as reflection on patterns. Another piece that was really well received was False Precision by Ariana Simpson. And the thesis of that piece is that it's essentially better to be, imprecisely but directionally right than to be precisely wrong. In it, Ariana encourages investors to get comfortable with being uncertain in a space. And at a high level, just to note, I love that, on Jill's side, it's more catered towards the developers, right, and the founders and the builders, and then Ariana is speaking to the investors. So I like that it seems to cover a wide user base. Anyway, but Ariana's piece talks about how we end up measuring things that are easiest to measure, but we are omitting things that are important but pretty difficult to quantify when we evaluate what projects to invest in. And so, you could easily see a dApp has high usage, right? But if you're not accounting for how difficult it is to install MetaMask, right? Or how like 80% or, that data point may be stale now, but like 80% of, user drop off happens then, and that wasn't something you were measuring because you weren't thinking through the psychology of the user trying to actually use the dApp, then that wasn't something you were accounting for, when you're thinking about the future of like, the point there being is to like expand what you're actually evaluating and be comfortable with the uncertainty that, if this doesn't get fixed, we may or may not be the narrative that wins, may or may not be the exact project that is going to, bring in the cash flow or, and she also, touches on velocity of tokens and, can we like even agree like what that actually means and how are you actually capturing value there, right? Like, and, is that market, is it as a velocity as it applies to the market or velocity as it applies to the token? So that post I especially loved because it runs orthogonal to what, people take comfort in numbers. It runs orthogonal to what you believe to be true. And I like that it challenged this preconceived notion of, you need to have the data, you need to have these formulas. And it's like, no, you actually don't have a basis of what you believe is going to be true and account for the things that are more qualitative than quantitative, especially in this nascent market, and don't over-index on data points.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think it's like, it reminds me a bit of some more Taleb stuff where it's like anti-fragility as a context, or as a concept. It doesn't say, hey, you need to predict all the things that happen and then account for them. Instead, it says, hey, what are the things, assume there's going to be lots of change and uncertainty, and make yourself something that when all that change and uncertainty happens, you result positively.
Precisely.
From it. So I like that.
Even stronger for it. Right.
Exactly. And I like the Free Company one a lot by Jill. It's very aligned with, the world likely is going in a direction kind of like that. And we're starting to see some bits and pieces of it within the crypto world, where people are starting to get paid in some weird ways for doing open source development, and there are these new digital nomads. And so there's lots of freedom that exists there. Well, with that, Soona, thank you. So I guess for my listeners, you should go to, if you're not starting your crypto day already with tokendaily.co, you should go and do that. And Soona, where can people find you on Twitter?
Oh yeah. So my handle is Soona or later. That's SOONAORLATER.
Nice, because her name is Soona. Good, perfect. Well, Soona, thank you again, and so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Sweet. And by the way, listeners, one final note: if you want to support me as a weird new form of a free company, then you can support me on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RhysLandmark. That's /RhysLandmark. Okay, goodbye.